I looked across the table at Chloe, her eyes sparkling with anticipation, a hopeful, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She thought this was it. She thought she'd won. But I was about to shatter that illusion, right here, on Valentine's Day, in the most romantic restaurant in Denver. This wasn't going to be a proposal. It was going to be a breakup. And the craziest part? She had no idea. To understand how I ended up in that moment, sitting in the Tuscan terrace with candles flickering and a custom chocolate dessert waiting in the kitchen, we need to go back a couple of years. My name's Ethan. I'm 32, and if you'd told me 2 years ago I'd be telling a story like this, I would have laughed. It all started at my cousin's wedding in downtown Denver. One of those huge affairs, 300 guests, open bar, a DJ who insisted on playing the Cupid Shuffle 3 times. I was trying to avoid my aunt's questions about my relationship status when this absolutely stunning woman walked up and ordered a vodka cranberry. Her name was Chloe Miller. She was 29, worked as a marketing executive, and she had this magnetic presence that made heads turn. We started talking, she laughed at my terrible jokes about the wedding cake, and by the end of the night, we were dancing to songs we both pretended to hate. It felt like something out of a romantic comedy. The first year with Chloe was genuinely amazing. We traveled to Austin, San Diego, even flew out to Phoenix for a long weekend. We'd stay up late, talking about everything from philosophy to our favorite childhood cartoons. And the physical chemistry? Off the charts. She had this beautiful apartment in Capitol Hill with huge windows overlooking the city. My place was in Lodi. We didn't live together, but we were practically inseparable. Her friends loved me. My friends thought she was gorgeous and fun. And my mom, bless her, started dropping hints about grandchildren every Sunday. Everything just felt perfect. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself, even as the first red flag started to flutter around the 1-year mark. I wonder, have you ever ignored warning signs in a relationship because you were just too invested to see them clearly? Because that was me. The marriage hints started subtly. Chloe would send me Instagram posts of engagement rings with captions like, just browsing, or she'd point out couples getting engaged at restaurants, her eyes doing this thing that just made me deeply uncomfortable. Then her best friend got engaged, and suddenly, every single conversation became about weddings. She started buying bridal magazines, leaving them on my coffee table when she stayed over, always claiming it was just for fun. I rationalized it. We'd been together over a year, she was 29, so of course marriage was on her mind. But it began to feel less like natural relationship progression and more like a calculated campaign. The hints turned into direct conversations. When do you think people should get engaged? What kind of wedding would you want? How many kids do you see yourself having? And every time I tried to pump the brakes, every time I said I wasn't ready to think about that, her mood would completely shift. She'd go from happy and laughing to cold and distant in about 5 seconds flat. Sometimes she'd tear up, saying I didn't take our relationship seriously. Other times, she'd just go silent and leave my apartment without a goodbye. The truly bewildering part was that the very next day, she'd act like nothing had happened. Text me good morning with heart emojis, suggest dinner, as if we hadn't just had a massive fight. I started to see a pattern. She'd blow up, make me feel like the bad guy, then reset everything and expect me to just move on, without ever actually resolving the issue. It was maddening. Then, around month 15, her ex-boyfriend, Alex, started popping up in conversations more frequently. At first, I thought she was just being open about her past. But I quickly noticed she only mentioned him when we were fighting about commitment. She'd say things like, Alex wanted to marry me, or, Alex would have proposed by now. I just sat there, thinking how bizarre it was that she kept comparing me to a guy she supposedly didn't want anymore. I admit, I did some light social media stalking, I'm only human. Alex was this successful real estate developer, drove a BMW, wore expensive suits in all his photos, and still followed Chloe on Instagram, liking most of her posts. The whole thing gave me this sick feeling. It seemed less like she was over him, and more like she was keeping him as a backup plan, just in case I didn't work out. Around month 18, things escalated. Chloe started making wedding venue visits. She'd come back, glowing, telling me about this beautiful barn in Wyoming or an elegant ballroom downtown. I felt like I was being pulled into a current I couldn't escape. One night, I tried to have an honest conversation at her apartment. "Chloe, I care about you, but I'm not ready for marriage right now." She completely lost it. Crying, yelling that I was wasting her time, that she could be with someone who actually valued her, that her biological clock was ticking, and I was selfish for not committing. I remember sitting on her couch, feeling like the villain in a movie I hadn't auditioned for. When I tried to defend myself, she just cried harder, saying I didn't understand what it was like to be a woman approaching 30. The next morning, of course, she texted, "I'm sorry. I love you," and suggested brunch. Like the fight never happened. That's when it truly hit me, this pattern was never going to change unless something drastic happened. But I loved her, or thought I did, so I just kept going, hoping things would somehow get better. Which, looking back, was incredibly stupid of me. Then came the night that changed everything. And honestly, I should have seen it coming. Chloe had been extra sweet all week, cooking dinner at my place, being affectionate, not mentioning marriage once. I actually thought we'd turned a corner. It was a cold January night. We were sitting at my dining table, eating spaghetti she'd made. Everything felt comfortable, normal. Then she looked at me with this completely calm expression and said, "I need to tell you something important." My stomach immediately dropped. I knew whatever was coming wasn't good. Chloe put down her fork, looked me straight in the eyes, still eerily calm, and said, "If you don't propose to me by Valentine's Day, I'm going back to Alex." The entire room, my apartment, just went silent, except for the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I sat there, frozen, trying to process what she'd just said. This wasn't a conversation or a discussion. This was an ultimatum, delivered like she was negotiating a business deal. The most unsettling part was how casual she sounded, like she was telling me what she wanted for breakfast. She went on to explain that Alex had been texting her, that he'd told her breaking up was the biggest mistake of his life, that he was ready to propose whenever she wanted. She said all this while looking at me like she expected me to panic and immediately pull out a ring. I could see in her face that she thought this was a brilliant strategy, that threatening to leave me for her rich ex-boyfriend would make me realize what I was about to lose and force me to commit. But instead, something entirely different happened inside my brain. I looked at her, so confident, so satisfied with herself, and this wave of clarity washed over me. It was so intense it almost felt physical. And I realized, this woman didn't love me. She was trying to trade me like a stock that wasn't performing well enough. The thought kept running through my mind, if someone really loves you, they don't threaten to leave you for someone else unless you marry them. They don't use another person as leverage to manipulate you into the biggest decision of your life. And they definitely don't set arbitrary deadlines like you're some kind of work project that needs to be completed by a certain date. I took a deep breath, and I said, "That's fair." And I watched her face light up with this triumphant smile. She thought she'd won. She thought I was agreeing to her terms, that a proposal was now inevitable. She reached across the table, grabbed my hand, and started talking about how she knew I'd understand, how happy we'd be, how Valentine's Day would be perfect for an engagement. I just sat there, nodding, my brain already 3 steps ahead, planning something completely different. The rest of dinner was surreal. She was chattering away about wedding ideas and honeymoon destinations, while I was having this intense internal conversation about what I was actually going to do. Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly saw a situation with perfect clarity, where all the confusion just evaporated, and you knew exactly what you had to do? I wasn't thinking about buying a ring or planning a proposal. I was thinking about how fundamentally messed up it was to be given an ultimatum by someone who claimed to love me. The phrase that kept repeating in my head was, I wasn't being chosen, I was being forced. Once I thought that, I couldn't unthink it. It was so obviously true. Chloe didn't want to marry me specifically. She wanted to get married before she turned 30, and I was the guy who happened to be there. If I didn't comply, she had Alex waiting in the wings like an understudy, ready to take my place. I realized that if I proposed under these conditions, I'd be walking into a marriage that started with blackmail. That would set the tone for the rest of my life, because she'd know that threatening to leave me was an effective tool to get whatever she wanted. That night, after I drove home, I sat in my living room until 3 a.m., just thinking through every possible outcome. I came to the conclusion I had to end this relationship, but it had to be clean, and it had to be final. I knew Chloe well enough to know that if I just broke up with her over text or at one of our apartments, she'd cry and manipulate and promise to change. And I'd probably cave, because I'm not great with emotional confrontation. I needed to do it in a public place where she couldn't make a huge scene, somewhere neutral where I could say what I needed to say, and then leave. And that's when the idea hit me. Valentine's Day was 3 weeks away. Chloe was expecting a proposal at a nice restaurant. So, why not give her the nice restaurant and the public setting, just not the outcome she was anticipating? The more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. She'd be so focused on getting engaged that she wouldn't see the breakup coming. And by the time she realized what was happening, it would already be done. Over the next 3 weeks, Chloe was the happiest I'd ever seen her. She genuinely believed she'd manipulated me into proposing. And watching her walk around in this delusional bubble of confidence was almost sad. She got her nails done in this specific shade of pink that she said would photograph well with a ring. She kept leaving little notes around my apartment with her ring size. She told all her friends that something big was happening on Valentine's Day. She bought a new red dress, probably $400. And she even made a hair appointment at some fancy salon downtown for the morning of. Meanwhile, I was systematically removing myself from her life in ways she didn't notice because she was too focused on her fantasy engagement. I took all my stuff out of her apartment over 2 weeks, just a few items each time I visited so she wouldn't get suspicious. I changed my Netflix password, my Amazon password, and made sure my name wasn't on anything of hers that could cause problems later. I called my buddy Mark, who's a lawyer, and asked him hypothetically if there was anything I needed to worry about legally when breaking up with someone. He told me as long as we didn't live together and didn't have any shared assets, I was fine. Which was a relief. The hardest part was booking the restaurant. I wanted somewhere nice enough that she'd believe a proposal was happening, but not so expensive that I'd regret spending the money when I broke up with her instead. I settled on the Tuscan Terrace in Cherry Creek. White tablecloths, dim lighting, known for romantic dinners. When I made the reservation, the host asked if we were celebrating anything special. I said something like that, which felt darkly funny. I also told my brother, James, what I was planning, because I needed someone to know in case Chloe tried to spin some crazy story afterward. He thought I was insane, but also said if I was going to do it, at least make it memorable. I guess I took that to heart. The week before Valentine's Day, Chloe started acting extra sweet and affectionate, probably wanting to make sure I was still on board. She kept saying things like she couldn't wait for our special day, with this knowing smile that made my skin crawl. She had no idea that I'd already mentally ended the relationship and was just waiting for the right moment to make it official. And there was something almost peaceful about having made the decision. All the anxiety and pressure just evaporated. Valentine's Day finally arrived. Chloe texted me early that morning, "Today is going to be perfect," with about 15 heart emojis. I just responded with a simple "see you tonight," because I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to tip her off. She spent the entire day getting ready. Spa, elaborate curls, the red dress, expensive heels. When I picked her up at 6:30, she looked absolutely stunning, and completely convinced she was about to get engaged. The drive to the restaurant was torture. She kept talking about how romantic the night was going to be, how she'd always remember this day, how grateful she was that I'd finally come around to her timeline. I just gripped the steering wheel and focused on the road. We pulled up to the Tuscan Terrace. The valet took my car, and as we walked toward the entrance, Chloe grabbed my arm and whispered, "This is perfect." And I thought to myself that she was right. It really was perfect, just not in the way she imagined. The hostess led us to a corner table, probably the most romantic spot in the entire restaurant, with candles flickering and a perfect view of the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chloe was practically glowing with anticipation as she sat down and smoothed out her red dress. She kept looking at me with those expectant eyes, like she was waiting for me to drop to one knee right there, before we even ordered drinks. I could see her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the menu, pretending to read it, even though I knew she wasn't processing a single word. The waiter came over and took our drink orders. Chloe got champagne, of course. I ordered a beer, because I needed something to keep me grounded in reality while this whole surreal situation played out. When the waiter left, she reached across the table, put her hand on mine, and started talking about how she'd been thinking about this moment for so long, how she knew we were meant to be together, how Valentine's Day was always her favorite holiday. I just nodded along, mentally rehearsing what I was going to say. The appetizers came out about 15 minutes later. Some kind of fancy bruschetta that Chloe barely touched because she was too nervous and excited. I ate mine slowly, because I knew that once these plates were cleared, everything was about to change. I waited until the waiter took away our appetizer plates and promised the main courses would be out in about 10 minutes. That's when I made my move, because the timing needed to be perfect. I reached across the table and took both of Chloe's hands in mine. Her eyes immediately filled with tears of joy, because she thought this was it. This was the moment she'd been manipulating me toward for months. She was already starting to smile, that huge, engaged girl smile that I'd seen on Instagram 1,000 times. I took a deep breath. "Chloe," I said, "I need to tell you something important." She nodded enthusiastically, her face beaming. Yes, yes. Say it. Ask me, I looked her right in the eyes. I don't want to marry you. I never want to marry you. And this relationship is over. I watched her face go through about 5 different emotions in the span of 2 seconds. First, confusion, like she didn't understand the words I'd just said. Then shock, as the meaning started to sink in. Then disbelief, like surely this was some kind of joke. Then anger, as she realized I was completely serious. And finally, this raw devastation that almost made me feel bad, except I remembered why I was doing this in the first place. She pulled her hands away from mine like I'd burned her and just stared at me, her mouth open. For maybe 10 seconds, she didn't say anything at all, which was the longest I'd ever seen Chloe go without talking. Then the questions started pouring out in this frantic stream. What did I mean? Was this because of the ultimatum? Was there someone else? I calmly explained that you don't threaten someone with their replacement if you actually love them. I told her that the moment she gave me that ultimatum about Alex, she'd shown me exactly what I was worth to her. And that worth was conditional, came with a deadline, like a business contract. I said that marriage should come from love and mutual choice, not from blackmail and manipulation. And that I refused to start a life with someone who'd already proven they'd use emotional pressure to get what they wanted. Chloe's face went from pale to bright red, and she started getting loud. Not quite yelling, but definitely loud enough that the couple at the next table glanced over with concern. She said I'd wasted her time, that I'd led her on, that I'd promised her a future. And I just sat there thinking about how none of that was actually true, because I'd never promised anything except to be honest about my feelings. She accused me of planning this whole thing just to humiliate her. And honestly, she wasn't completely wrong about that. I definitely could have broken up with her at her apartment or somewhere private. But I also knew that doing it publicly meant she couldn't guilt me into staying or manipulate me with tears in the privacy of one of our homes. The waiter approached our table, looking uncomfortable. He could obviously tell something was wrong. He asked if everything was okay. I said we were fine, and asked if he could bring out any dessert that might have been ordered ahead of time. Chloe looked at me with this confused expression because she had no idea what I was talking about. but I had a strong suspicion, based on how confident she'd been, that something special was waiting in the kitchen. The waiter nodded slowly and disappeared back toward the kitchen, looking relieved to escape the tension. Chloe stood up from the table. "You're going to regret this," she said, with a venom in her voice I'd never heard before. She grabbed her purse, and I could see her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. I assumed she was calling an Uber, because there was no way she'd sit through dessert with me now. Have you ever made a decision that felt ruthless in the moment, but absolutely necessary for your future? She stood there next to the table for what felt like an eternity, probably waiting for her ride to show up. Neither of us said a word, because there was nothing left to say. Then the waiter came back out, carrying a small plate with what looked like a custom chocolate dessert. As he got closer, I could see words written across the top in elegant white frosting. He set it down on the table, and the words "Say Yes" were staring up at both of us. The whole situation became so absurd that I almost started laughing. Chloe had apparently pre-ordered this dessert weeks ago, probably right after she gave me the ultimatum, assuming that I'd proposed during dinner, and that this dessert would be the perfect moment to celebrate our engagement. The waiter stood there, looking deeply confused about why a couple who was clearly breaking up had an engagement dessert. Chloe's face went from angry to completely mortified as she realized what had just happened. I looked at the dessert, then at her, and said, "That's really something." I could see her trying to decide whether to run out of the restaurant immediately or stay and try to salvage some dignity. She chose to leave. She turned and walked as fast as she could in those expensive heels toward the exit. And I sat there, alone at the table, with this Say Yes dessert and the attention of half the restaurant on me. The waiter came back after a moment and asked if I still wanted the check. I said yes, and apologized for the scene. He actually laughed and said he'd seen much worse breakups during his years at the Tuscan Terrace, which made me feel slightly better. The bill came out to $147, which felt like a small price to pay for my freedom. I left a $40 tip, because that waiter had definitely earned it dealing with our drama. I drove home in complete silence. No music, no phone calls, just me and my thoughts processing what had just happened. When I got back to my apartment, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief, like I'd just escaped something terrible. Chloe started texting me around 10 that night. First with angry messages about how I'd humiliated her in public, then with sad messages about how we could work things out if I'd just listen, then with threatening messages about how I'd ruined her life and everyone would know what kind of person I really was. I read the first 10 messages, just to make sure there wasn't anything urgent. Then I blocked her number. I was done engaging with the drama and manipulation. I found out later through a mutual friend that Chloe had told everyone I cheated on her, which wasn't true. But most of our mutual friends could see through her version of events because they'd witnessed her behavior patterns over the years. That same friend told me that Chloe had gone back to Alex within a week of our breakup, which honestly just proved my point about her having a backup plan all along. She didn't need time to grieve or process. She just moved laterally to her next option, exactly like I predicted. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. I braced myself for more drama, but apparently Chloe was too busy with Alex to keep focusing on me. My life slowly returned to normal over the next few months. I started going out with friends again without worrying about her reactions. I focused on my work. And I even went on a few casual dates, though nothing serious. About 6 months later, that same mutual friend reached out and told me something that made the whole experience feel almost poetic. Apparently, Chloe had pulled the exact same ultimatum move on Alex. She'd given him a deadline to propose or she'd leave, probably using me or some other guy as the threat this time. And here's the kicker, Alex broke up with her, too. Because nobody wants to be manipulated into marriage, regardless of how much they might care about someone. I never reached out to Chloe again. And I never regretted my decision. Looking back, the only thing I regret is not ending it sooner, when the red flags first started appearing around that 1-year mark. The whole experience taught me something valuable about relationships and self-respect that I wish I'd understood earlier. Someone who truly loves you will never force you to prove it on their timeline, with their conditions. And they definitely won't threaten to replace you if you don't comply with their demands. Walking away from manipulation is always the right choice. Even when it's hard, even when you're invested, even when everyone around you thinks you should just go along with it to keep the peace. There's a difference between compromise in a relationship and surrendering your agency. And I'd crossed that line so many times with Chloe that I'd almost forgotten what healthy boundaries looked like. That Valentine's Day dinner cost me $147 and a 2-year relationship. But it bought me something infinitely more valuable. It bought me back my self-respect and my freedom to choose a partner who wants to build a life with me, not someone who wants to force me into one. There's only one thing more expensive than leaving a toxic relationship, and that's staying in one and paying for it with years of your life that you'll never get back. I'm grateful every day that I chose the cheaper option. What would you have done in my shoes?